pin myself on there, but we won't worry about it. Yeah, so good evening, everybody here, physically, virtually, people that probably didn't get to come because of the snow or otherwise. Yeah, so my name's Stephen Eglinton. I'm going to be as quick as possible and give you an overview to digital BIM, what is BIM, lightning fast. I believe this is recorded, so you can always look up later. But first of all, who's heard of BIM in the room? Maybe people can put their hands up virtually as well if they want. So most people, keep your hands up on if you're online. Yeah, okay. Good. Yeah, some. Okay, fine, great. Thank you. So a lot of people. So hopefully I'll be able to add value. Just very briefly, you've already had an introduction to me. My main job at the moment is actually working with the World Bank, but it's in strategic asset management, and I used to work at the London Underground, and I've worked with others. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. So thank you for that, and thank you to our hosts, RSSB, for this evening. Very briefly, just to give some background why I'm talking to BIM, about BIM, it covers all domains, right? So it covers everything. Although I have been a member of the PIM Institute for at least a decade, I can't remember how long, but anyway, I work across all sectors, which we've already heard, and BIM applies to all sectors. So obviously, everyone I'll be speaking to today works in rail to some degree, but just be aware that it's a common language that we can use across domains. So that's noteworthy who I've worked with, particularly with tube lines. That was some time ago, and it's all been in information management, and BIM is heavily involved with the management of information. And that's probably enough about me. How did I get into BIM? Just through GIS, basically. So I used to work with the central UK government. That used to be quite clunky. The reason I'm mentioning this is there were inefficiencies in the process, which would be apparent in managing information that would be relevant to any sector, and it just wasn't particularly good. Then we moved into a more sort of automated realm, and that's when I was at Tube Lines, which, for the people that don't know, that used to be a public-private partnership infrastructure company that used to maintain and operate part of the London Underground, the London Metro, if there's people from overseas. And it went very well, and I was managing asset information. So the common theme is I'm not an engineer. I often work with engineers of all descriptions, but the only common theme I can find in my career, because I struggle sometimes when I fill out CVs, it's been about data. And it's been about data and the reuse of data and the management of data and the change around it. And why I'm interested in BIM, and we will get on to some examples obviously for the rail sector. So BIM stands for Building Information Modelling, because there's probably quite a few slides for this short time, but again, I'll make sure they're shared afterwards to keep that in mind. It's about improving the way we manage information models, data, documents, the whole thing. And there are some potentially huge savings for efficiency savings. And I'll talk about other aspects of BIM as well. So just remember, if you do know something about BIM, there'll be some people that do not. So forgive me if this is too simplistic, but BIM is about managing 3D models, geometry, and it's about managing, or it can be, depending who you are, about managing all the other type of information again. So it would include things like drawings, linear diagrams that we use in the rail sector. All of that would be in scope. So for the theme tonight, I will just pause on this slide for a moment. So what is BIM to me? It is the last point. So if people think it's 3D, that's not wrong, that's their perspective. That is the origin of building information modelling. And for many people, it still remains that 3D modelling. However, particularly in the United Kingdom, at least some years ago now, particularly in 2011, it started to kick off. The word BIM was used to mean something bigger, to mean a process, a systematic approach to managing information for the built environment. So I mean, for purposes of tonight, I mean the last definition, which is about a strategic approach to managing information. And there's a standard there. You can look it up in your own time, and I teach them standards. I should say I teach the standards on behalf of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and I have done for 8 years, and I also teach them for other entities. But so I normally talk to engineers. And they're not IT professionals by definition, they're engineers. So again, we need to have an appropriate language set. This is the definition in the international standard. So it's a use of a shared digital representation of a built asset. So that could be anything. You have to define what it is. It could be a whole rail infrastructure, it could be a bridge. To facilitate design, construction and operation processes to form a reliable basis for decisions. So how is it relevant to the rail sector? It's about decision making. So BIM essentially, as it says there, it's for the whole life of the asset. It's about improving decisions, better quality information. So that's really important. And the reason why I'm here, or the reason why I get involved in this kind of stuff, in the rail sector, I don't have any use cases because we don't need them with the audience. But in other sectors, I often use rail as a use case about how we have had to improve the way we look at operations and maintenance. And hence, I'm probably standing in the right building for that conversation, so I don't need to say any more than that. But so we've learned, particularly in rail, about how important it is to have a very accurate reflection of reality as far as the operation and maintenance, and have enough information to make the right decisions. And some sectors are playing catch up, so it's all relative. Again, what is BIM? It's not only the technology, but it is an enabler. The technology enables the process. So if you talk to technology vendors, they might say something different, but if you have infinite budget for technology, you still won't be able to comply with the international standards. It requires some kind of change management, demonstration of process, demonstration of the right standards are being implemented. And it's not just for buildings. Well, that's self-evident because I'm here, but you'd be amazed that, yeah, some people don't quite get that. It's not, I've already said this, it's not just 2D and 3D CAD. But I've already made that point. So it's everything that we do. Let's go over here. And again, for some people it will be, but not in this context, but it is part of it. And it's a critical part of it. So BIM, if I just go back to this one, the point I was making about the decision making, again, what decisions are important to us in the rail sector? Typically, they're probably safety focused, right? That's not the only decisions we make, but that obviously drives a lot of what we do. So a lot of the conversations I will have around BIM and wider digital transformation is around safety, is around how we make efficiencies, but often I do come back to safety because it motivates people. Again, in this sector, it's self-evident, but in other sectors, maybe it's not so obvious. You know, so why do we need the data? It's to help make the decisions. Some terms I put in there just for after today when I share the slides. There's some other terminologies that aren't quite BIM, but they're dangerously close to some concepts. So BIM is, for me, is that international standard, and there's a rigorous process because obviously, particularly in the rail sector as well, we have quite rigorous standards, so we get it. There are some concepts which are broader than BIM around digital, the implementation of digital in the built environment. I've just put them there if you want to search afterwards. So virtual design and construction, by definition, is only the construction and design phase of it. I'm interested in the whole life. So again, there might be a conference with that name, for example. Digital construction appears to be synonymous with BIM, and it probably is for most people, but not for me, because I'm interested more in post-construction, O&M. So again, for me, it's not a synonym at all. Digital engineering, well, it's not really defined, but I quite like that one. Obviously, with a link to the ICE, that works for me. So why do we want to do BIM? Again, you don't need to read these. These are for when people get the slides, but it will make better decisions for us, but also we also have to do it. So the Central United Kingdom government in April of 2016 mandated the use of BIM on central government projects, the process phase. And at the time it was called BIM Level 2. or the BIM mandate. It's the same thing. And there was a suite of standards. The standards have evolved into international standards, which I keep mentioning, ISO 9650. And again, they are mandated, which people don't realise. So there's something called the construction playbook. So again, this is, if people want to look it up, I expect most people probably won't, but the construction playbook which mandates it. And also there's, so these are high-level policy type documents from the central UK government. Transforming Infrastructure Performance Roadmap is another document in which it says you have to do the UK implement the ISO 9650 standards, which in the UK we call the UK BIM framework. So I've put links there for when people get the slides. So if you work in central government, you have to do it for new projects. We could, I won't get into the debate about how close the entity has to be to the central government, because that's for another conversation, but it is best practice. So it's to the point where you'd have to make the argument, why are you not using best practice to manage information on infrastructure projects? Because there is an international standard which happens to originate in the United Kingdom, and the central government saying you have to use it. Why would you not? So obviously the rail sector typically would be using it. These maybe are not our risks, but in a lot of my other work I look at risk. I might not perform the risk modelling, but particularly the work that I do with the World Bank, often why we want the information is to do with risk. So disaster risk insurance or disaster risk financing. The point being, the clarity of purpose is clear why we need to have the information. And again, this is maybe where we need to consider how we describe why we need to do BIM. It cannot just be solely because the government is saying. It has to be, we will improve this, we will have a better visibility of, like I say, risk. Another driver, this is the why bit, another driver for some people would be, depending who you are in an organisation, it doesn't have to necessarily be about the financial benefits. It could be about the ability to report. So again, I'm not into the hierarchy, but again, it does depend where people sit in an organisation and what they think about, just like people with different roles. So again, if you're involved in these kind of things like sustainability, they require information. So if you want to demonstrate and prove that you're conforming with, for example, you know your embedded carbon, for example, on projects, how do you monitor it? But where does the information actually, like, how do you actually get the information? Is a supplier providing that information? So on the right there, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, for people that are not familiar, in most infrastructure organisations, they would align a lot of their activity at the top level. Again, there's way so much in here. I'm trying to make the case for where you can look after today and find more information around why you would want to do BIM, implement BIM and the standards. The Central UK Government has already put together a framework with different methodologies about how you could measure the benefits. They would apply to the rail sector just as they would. So they actually have metrics in there. It's not just it can make things less risky, like I'm saying. It's actually got metrics in there, how you would work it out. So economists were behind this. So there are the different types of lens, if you like, or focus. So for example, time saving, health and safety improvements, cost saving, material saving, improved reputation. So anyway, you could look at that in your leisure. So again, these are why would I do BIM type I would. Part of the international standard is around managing risk. So again, I'll just give you that slide and suggest people look it up. You can see so it's a suite of standards. BIM standards one. There's a suite of 6 now. 5. There will be 6. And part 5 is about risk. How could you use a methodology of managing information to capture your risks, but actually digitalize the risks? So again, that's another one, which is part 6, which I believe will become an international standard. At the moment, it's not. It's only applies in the United Kingdom. You should use it according to the government. And that's around health and safety as well. So, sorry, the previous one was security. Sorry, I kept saying risk, but the previous one was for security. This one is around risk. This one, part 6. So collectively, it's the difference between the ISO 19650 standards and the UK BIM framework, slightly confusing, is that in the UK, we have extra bits. So we have guides. I mean, we've got a slightly larger scope. I'll skip these and we can look at them. So in summary, a lot of it is around decision making. That's sort of BIM in a nutshell. Why would we want it? We want to get the validated data. So the green is all conceptual, right? The information at the beginning, whether it's a model, whether it's a two-dimensional, whether it's representation 3D, it could be a linear diagram, could be a document certificate. How do we aggregate that information to make the decisions and then take action or not take action? So that's, again, you know, we know the assets have a life cycle because we work in engineering. But again, people only, by definition, people only focus on their work area. So, for example, project people will focus on projects. Right? And my argument would be, well, maybe they should because they work in projects. There's this sort of assumption when I talk about BIM, I really do mean the whole life, like decommissioning, reuse, pre-project. The problem is that's not how it works, right? And certainly that's not how the funding streams work. So it's a real problem. So I'll often use this graphic, which is not particularly sophisticated, just to say, where do people identify? You know, do people say, oh, I'm in projects? Probably they would be, current audience, right? Or programs. Or do they work at an organizational level, sort of a more O&M type level? It just depends, because the story of why you would care about BIM and what it means to you is clearly going to be different. You know, and that might be obvious, but again, people don't make a sort of a good enough use case, if you like. One example that clearly isn't mine, you can see in the top left who this is from, High Speed 2. It's all credit to High Speed 2, obviously. I didn't create this. This is a graphical representation of the land that was acquired. So again, this is from some years ago. John Kirby will have used this originally, it's not mine. But again, this is a 3D representation with a 2D overlay as well. You know, something very practical about how can we visualize something that's intangible. These are land ownership. You know. So again, we do this already. So you know, but it can be done more efficiently. You can automate the compulsory purchase process, for example. So I'll just let it run just because there's a visual. So it's a bit counterintuitive, but almost always I don't use graphics when I talk because I've seen enough shiny, fancy 3D models to last me a lifetime. But the problem is people want to see them, so I thought I'd add at least a few graphics. How long have we got? About 10 minutes left. Anyway, I'll let it run. Anyway, so that is the whole route. Of course, it's a tunnel section. It's a long. There you go, right, okay. So clearly that's visualization. It would have been used for consultation purposes. It would have been used for land acquisition purposes. I used to work at DEFRA, which is the Department for Environment. On the other aspect, it would have been used for what environmental designations are they going to come close to, so that would have been an early discussion. But another example is obviously from Crossrail, now called the Elizabeth Line. For people not based in London, the operational side of it is Elizabeth Line, so the Crossrail project. They were very mature and there's lots of learning. So again, I would commend you to look at the Crossrail Legacy Learning website. I'll send a proper link. There's lots of materials, and my contact for that is Malcolm Taylor. So he now works in Crossrail International, but he was in charge of the BIM and the technical information. And you can see other people involved, Ross Detton and other people. But again, I'm not going to unpick this. I'm just going to say there are some elements within the rail sector that are highly advanced, and there are some that aren't, as far as how they manage their information. So again, you can see in Crossrail, they'd already put a lot of effort in how they describe assets and facilities and functions, and this obviously was part of how they contracted and procured work and how they monitored the work activity. So again, there's loads and loads of materials I could show you there, but I've just put some links in to that. But if BIM is about sharing information, don't necessarily worry about this slide. It's just to show you the kind of slides you'll get if you look up the legacy website. It's not trivial, let's put it that way. So the slide, the graphic on the right, shows that they had a complex technology solution. It wasn't just, I won't name any products, but you can imagine if you work in the rail sector, which was the big product that they had that stored most of their infrastructure information, 3D, and you can imagine the product probably that was the mapping and GIS software. Of course, I know what they are, but I'll resist saying any particular suppliers. So there is complexity in the technology. I say BIM isn't the technology, but someone has to implement it. So we can sort of rise above the technology, at least for this conversation. So where's the benefit? What's the outcome? And the outcome could be just about making efficiencies about how we contract out work or chunk up, as in segregate parts of the P-way for contract or model purposes. So again, people might have seen this before. There's almost infinite ways, but this diagram I often use, and happens to be from the rail, because it is we do typically, luckily in the rail, I know it's not quite as neat as this, but we do tend to have different disciplines working typically, because we're lucky, in different areas physically, not always. But if you go in a building, you know, maybe what central, it's not quite like that. So anyway, but sometimes it can be as easy as you imagine. And just a quick slide, because I could talk all day on this stuff. I literally do when I do the teaching. Where are things going? So BIM is BIM, still by name, Building Information Modeling. I'd recommend you look up ISO 19650, and again in the UK, we call that the UK BIM framework. So and there's web pages and guides. Where are things going? The language, we still need to do BIM, but that is only getting the bare minimum, the basics right. So again, if you look at this diagram, this comes from the central UK government, what was called the Centre for Digital Blueprint. And they don't exist now formally, but all of their materials are still online. I won't say any more about that just for now, in the interest of time. But you see BIM is at the bottom there. So we need to get the basics right, get the foundations. Just on every project, every time, do we get the minimum core information we want and it's trustworthy? And the answer will be maybe not. That's what BIM's about. It's not exciting necessarily. It's not necessarily leading edge stuff. It's about trustworthiness of data and repeatability and scalability. That's, you know, on every project, if I'm a rail infrastructure organization, every project I can bring all the data together and give that single view. It's not necessarily about then what I do with it long term. That's when we've introduced the term digital twin. But you can see the example. This wasn't, I just happened to have this in here, that slide. It typically is the rail infrastructure that's one of the examples we give. We know it's complex. We know there's different, you know, I'm here at the P-way Institute, but then there's, you know, I work in engineering to some degree. My brother happens to be a signaller in network rail. Again, there's different industry bodies, a different language, different way of describing the physical infrastructure, different terminologies about how I would describe where I am. And that's in the real world. So we will be getting that in the virtual world, if not already. Where do you mean? I mean this chainage. So again, we need to be careful. This is where the concept of a digital twin can help. And the UK government defines them, I won't read these out, but I'll let you read them. It's about a feedback. So just the last phrase on the first paragraph, feedback into the physical twin via real-time control. So it's about having a feedback, it's about having a representation of the asset, physical asset, digitally, virtually, but it's about having a feedback loop. But we still need BIM as the beginning of that process. How do we build this digital twin? We have a process which, under the UK BIM framework, which helps me get some of that information together. So it's not separate to BIM. BIM helps enable part of this process because the vision is we move towards a national digital twin. So that's all domains, all sectors, all infrastructure. And yeah, let's start with rail, right? And they've moved on for the handful of people that were familiar with BIM level 2 and wondered why I've not mentioned it. Again, just in the interest of time, I took that slide out, but we've sort of moved on. For the people that do know, in April 2016, which I did mention already, the BIM level 2 was a requirement, a level of maturity about how you share information on projects. Now we don't talk about that. We've moved on because clearly it's a continual improvement. So you want BIM level 3, 4, 5, 10, 100. So we just say no, we're not going to go there. And also it depends what sector. Oil and gas might be slightly more, or is more mature than rail in some elements, and then rail is more mature than other sectors. So it's like you never be right. So what they've gone with is design, build, operate, and we talk more about sort of integration. How do we integrate the information itself? So it's a continual. You will see graphics, particularly online and LinkedIn, which make me smile, where they have got BIM level 3, 4, 5, 6 from other continents, which is fine. It's good for the conversation, but we don't formally recognise that in the UK, just to be clear. So if people say we do BIM level 5, you go, well, fine, but we just want to do what we need to do. And that's going to be different for Transport for London when they're building bus stops to a nuclear power station. It's going to be a different requirement, and it's almost just like with the different asset groups on the rail sector. Civils have different will have bridges and tunnels will have different requirements to track, obviously, different precision tolerances, standards, so therefore different information requirements, different survey requirements. And I'll do 2 more slides. I want to leave some time for questions and answers. The place to go if you want more information is UK BIM framework. Like I've said, that formally describes what I've been talking about. It's not sector specific. That's the whole point. It's for any sector. They have some very good guides, which I'd recommend you to look at if you're into the information management side of it. The other thing I'd recommend you look at is there is something called BIM for Rail. So I'm not directly involved now, but I sort of was involved, and I used to be involved in other groups. So this is a group of people, just like yourselves, people that may be interested in not implementing BIM, based on what I've been describing it is, who meet physically and have typically work in the obvious rail organisations in the UK. So again, if you want to get involved specifically to do with rail infrastructure, then there's a group of like-minded people. And the last 3 slides just to summarise. So how would I implement BIM? Or how do I get people interested in it? So I could talk all day about risk and all the rest of it. One way in for me, this is just what I've done, typically is whole life asset management and talk about the asset management side of it. For the people that don't know, there is the Institute of Asset Management, which they have international chapters, but they happen to originate in the United Kingdom. And just look it up. If you work in projects, you work in projects, but nevertheless, that is very mature. And there is a mature international standard called ISO 55000 series, all these standards, right? But there is a framework. The important thing is there is a framework which is meaningful out of context. In this version, they've superimposed circular economy on it. But the important thing for this evening is the purple bit at the bottom, which is information management. So BIM enables part of that. Doesn't solve the whole problem, but it helps. And the other things I've been talking about are obviously risk, if you look at all of it. And that's not digital, that's how do I strategically manage my asset, my estate, everything. So normally operational directors hopefully live and breathe that type of framework, because it's their job. So that's often a way in. Another way, clearly this is from Network Rail, is to have simply have good communications. So this is from Orbis. I'm sure most people have heard of Orbis. That was a asset information improvement program that was some time ago at Network Rail. I worked on it. I'm sure lots of people did. But I tell you what, they had very good comms around it. There's a video there if you want a link. So where do people fit? I've said people have different perspectives, and I had that sort of very horrific with projects. They've got an amazing infographic. You can zoom in, and within reason, you can find any kind of role or discipline. This is my penultimate slide, don't worry. Another example, no doubt the same team by the look of it, High Speed 2. Now, this is in the context more of BIM. Again, credit will go to people like John Covey when he was at High Speed 2. And again, it's an infographic about the value of BIM, so you can, I'm not sure if there's a public version, but I'll try to get one if people want it to unpick it. So, in summary, definitely go to obviously the vertical events rail, but I'd recommend you also go to events that are not necessarily rail. Two, I'd recommend, I've got no commercial relationship, but I do help organise the first one, because you get people from all sectors, but it's similar challenges. So there could be highways people. That's about geospatial, so things like mapping and survey. But clearly, rail infrastructure is one of the use cases. And the conference at the bottom left, you can see, is run at the same time right next to it. And that's called Digital Construction Week. And elements of BIM and the rest of it will be there beyond BIM. So I better finish there, but thank you for your time. That's all I had to say. So are there any questions? So thank you very much. Well, I'll let you do.
Okay.
Yes, sure. Go on.
Given the events around the pandemic, where we all had to work from home, and we all discovered that we could work smarter and learn many skills with IT, has that worldwide driven a shift on BIM?
Not well. So tonight the title was BIM, right? Yeah. So I know I kept saying digital transformation, dropping it in there. Like my real day job is any kind of digital use of technology. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So BIM is just a subset. Yeah. So BIM, yes, it will have done, but I would argue there's been an impact on everything digital. So I'm not saying no, I'm saying yes, but I would say an equally significant thing is people just virtually working. So for example, I know people that would do virtual inspections on construction sites. Now, how it eventually got signed off would be the interesting bit. There's no doubt someone had to eventually turn up to do you assume your signature, but you could still do a supplementary inspection, let's call it that. I'm not too sure of the process. So I've seen that. So that's linked to these I won't say more than that just in case, but that was linked to these kind of infrastructure sectors. So, but they could only do it because, sorry, just to be clear, there was sort of a three-dimensional representation involved, and I know that people have been using more than ever automatic change detection, which is if you fly a drone, you can automatically. Now it's not pure BIM, but it's kind of related to that. So the answer is yes, but I think it's probably more noteworthy the things that are around BIM. So. Yeah.
Just follow that up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, can I just actually, the use of the emoji for thumbs up became very popular during the course of the pandemic for inspections. That yes, we acknowledge.
Really?
Because going through the first lockdown, there was inspections going on.
Yeah.
We were still evolving with digital signatures, and that's how we got acknowledged.
So you can use the thumbs up emojis.
Yeah.
Really?
And just to say, although the obvious implication is I love technology, it's not really. I mean, that's the hat I wear tonight, but I'm more interested in the process efficiency.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I will be the party pooper. I will be the one that says, "Are you sure you can do that legally?"
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good challenge.
But yeah, someone say, "Oh, we'll put it on a tablet." I'll go, "Yeah, go on then. Go on, get out the legislation, and it will say you have to have a hard copy signed." So there is this arms race between the digital, which again might be obvious, but just to spell it out, like you mentioned, digital signatures. There is this ongoing arms race between what's possible technically. I'm the guy that will say, whoa, because remember, if I'm typically focused on safety, do you mean like, so if something doesn't go so well, and you have to provide evidence in a certain scenario, a legal scenario, you probably might end up with paper or not. So I think people need to be careful. They can't jump on the. But that'll be interesting how the law catches up with the digital twin part. And you can, sorry, and you can use BIM, I did mention it, you can use BIM legally and it's fine, but people just need to be clear about the rigour around it. So there is a guide, the Rock Winfield, I'll look it up, but there is a guide around that. If you go to UK BIM framework, there is a guidance around that.
So just following on from the fact that projects quite rightly were the forerunner for BIM and digital engineering. As time has gone on, what have been the critical learnings for the maintaining, operating, and even decommissioning elements of it?
Sorry, how do you mean the critical element? What do you mean?
I suppose, if you like, the project can, if you like, define the requirements because they're the forerunner, But at some stage you've got to hand over to a maintainer or an operator.
Well, and capture the data.
Capture the data. And then allow them to use
and then reuse it.
Etc. So what has caught people out, if you like, in that part of it?
Well, I guess I have to be careful. I typically don't work, other than the World Bank where we're improving things, a lot of my work is because things haven't been going so well. Like for the last decade. So, but where I guess where they haven't, it still isn't quite as seamless as it could be between the transition of this is data, the actual handover of the data between ops, between CapEx projects and operations. Because it's easy for me to put it in a diagram and put an arrow between it, but the actual, like physically, where does the data go? That is, I mean, I could name 100 things. They're probably safety critical things that I don't want to say if I'm being recorded, but I can see inefficiencies in the handover still.
And then there are also sort of the knowledge and technology within the maintenance organisation to manage the data and manipulate the data. So the projects don't do this, do they? Say, tick, I've delivered that, dumped it, accept this, now get on with it. Operations. Do they do that? Of course they probably do it. So you need operations to have the knowledge, the competence to manage that data, make decisions with that data. It's a very easy project not to do that.
Exactly. Sorry, you had your
question.
Can
I move on?
Please.
And then it's a key element of the whole life cost of it as well, because
and there's no ongoing cost. So I mean, I have an issue in terms of, I think it's good. So I was on the Northern Ireland Extension project. I hope that that's completely digital beyond Kennington loops, and I hope they've captured all the data, and that's fantastic that everything at 9 Elm Station and the tunnel should be captured digitally. I'd really love some feedback from anyone online or at TfL if that happens. So that's tick perfect. But in comparison to that, if we look at Victoria Station upgrade, because I was in chair asset management, asset engineer signing things off, I constantly had a pop at the project saying, with my maintenance colleagues, saying you're giving us digital data allegedly associated with the new works, but it's no bloody good unless you capture the whole station. And in my opinion, it wasn't difficult to capture the whole of Victoria Station because the new bit of the station is substantially more than the old. But no, the project and budgeting would not provide for that. So am I right that I sort of 2/3 or 3/4 data and 1/4 on the old data is about as much good as a kick in the head?
Well, I mean, it depends. I know Malcolm Taylor has a nice diagram, which I haven't used today, about the volume of data obviously goes, because people, so normally I'd be working more in operational maintenance. I don't want all the project data, right? But no, we need it as a record, obviously for legal reasons and for if we've left go. So I want everything from the project, right? But the project is now over. Right? So if I'm the client, it could be any sector, if I've just paid someone billions of pounds for a new whatever it is.
Don't we just?
And here you go. In theory, if I'm actually the owner, they should have already saved, if everything goes as according it should do, things have already been saved out, ducks in a row. I shouldn't have to go dipping into the massively voluminous project pot. Because it's the whole point, if it's done properly through this BIM framework, things are incrementally delivered. But the reason I throw this diagram up, again, I don't want to go into too much detail because I can literally speak hours about these things, but this is formally from the international standard for people that are not familiar. And of course, there's this, why do we need a suite of 5 standards? Because it's not easy, right? But this diagram is persistent and has existed in almost exactly the same form since 2013, since the British only standards. Basically, the lower, very quickly, the lower portion is project information, right? So what do we need on a project at a high level? And then at a very detailed level, granular level, that we could actually commission, like specifically this kind of survey or this kind of model for this purpose. So it has to be like very clear, and I can tick it off and check. This would be a more sort of high level. And then this represents the actual information. So it's all conceptual, right? This is the actual information somewhere. Could be in one database, multiple databases. And that collects all the totality of the information on the project that's in my scope of interest, which is probably almost everything. It's called the project information model. And then, sorry, to get to your point, it was, this is what you would be after. This is actually the information, the actual, some could be spreadsheets, 3D models, scans, lasers, last file scans, whatever it is. You have to, you or whomever has to have had an input at this level to say, we really know what we want, and it's going to be manifested through this. That used to be called employers' requirements for people that are familiar with the previous lingo, but when the standard was internationalized, that didn't quite work. And also, if it was a government-to-government entity, that wouldn't quite be the right language anyway, right? So it's whenever you're exchanging information under contract or an MOU. So this is the asset management, or the O&M, or the O&M or the FM bit here. So someone has to engage, but a lot of people just only focus on that bit.
Yeah.
And then this, so that's you want these. This is the top level. This is why I mentioned ISO 55000 series. These are sort of the organisational requirements. So it might be I would like information to demonstrate my compliance with the Climate Change Act, for example, to do with building performance. I know we're talking about rail, but to do with asset performance. Now that may or may not give any value to the project. I mean, I'm sure a lot of project people would say yes, it would actually, but anyway, let's pretend it doesn't. But I'm the director of sustainability at a given infrastructure company. So I'm embedding that in the project requirements, because it's my asset, I'm paying, I'm the ultimate client. Here's £1 billion, and by the way, I'd like some extra metrics through the models or whatever. And then some of them will facilitate O&M and commissioning, and some of them may or may not, but they're different. That's what I was talking about. That's why I mentioned 55,000. So ISO 55,000 series, again, I keep saying that, hopefully people will look up others, should and will inform these. But it has to be a very mature client to say we definitely know what information we want, and we will get it because we are the, sorry, you can see I'm passionate about this thing, but that is not what's happening typically every time, and that's the challenge.
You really need to budget for it in your scoping and planning.
Yeah.
Not only in the project budget, but in your asset management and maintenance organisation, you need to budget for them to have time to interface with the project. So,
Yeah, but I think there's greater acceptance of that now. I think there's greater acceptance. That's the way we have to go. Yeah.
well, that's a result. Yeah. There's acceptance nowadays.
The idea of taking around racks of plans just isn't there anymore.
But it's definitely, by any measure, it's an investment in the things that we're talking about, the information, because people say, oh, is it cheaper to digit? Well, it probably is more efficient on projects, but it depends how many you have. That's why I put the project portfolio. If I'm a large asset holder, could be any kind of infrastructure, immediately it makes sense to, and international, let's say, immediately it makes more sense to have normalized or aligned ways of describing my assets. Or at a national level, if I can, even something like a maintenance contract for, let's say, stations, right? If I have different geographic regions and it's hard to benchmark the actual asset, what assets are in the building and how are they maintained and what's the size of the building and how is it, if I can't, and sorry, I keep going to buildings, but it would be exactly the same on infrastructure, or the way you subcontract out earthworks maintenance, for example. You need a common. I'm slightly out of the loop now, but it used to be that Network Rail and London Underground didn't quite describe earth structures or earthworks in the same way.
It's still the same.
Was it? Right, okay.
Getting closer.
But again, I was on workshops. But the thing is, it depends who's asking. So if the regulator, you know, are in the right building, aren't we? If the regulator wants them described in a certain way.
Well, RSSB.
The ORR, I mean, but I know we're not there. But the thing is with digital, and I would argue, yes, that would have been time consuming, but there's kind of no excuse now with digital. So for example, if you describe a tunnel in a certain, or a bridge in a certain way, and you have the elements in a certain way because of material type to do with inspection regimes, to do with regulator compliance, but I might have a different take on it, and it's not that difficult digitally to reconfigure the digital version of the asset to say, actually, these 5 elements, I call them something else in the contract. Do you know what I mean? Because there'll be contracts that have been let for decades. You can't change it.
Indeed.
So, but that's where digitally it's how much effort. It will be some effort, though. Sorry, get back to the point. It will be some effort to do that, but not. It's not infinitely complex to do it. So it's about the will. You know, it's about, so within reason, anyone can do anything they can imagine technically. It's about, are people involved early enough in the decision making around the contracts for the procurement. And one slide I didn't use, because obviously I probably had a few too many slides, was about talking about data and information as a commodity.
An asset.
An asset, yeah, and then I'll intentionally use the word commodity, because then then I have to sort of properly explore, because asset we consider intentionally say our asset management, but commodity, out of context, it still is clear. It has value, it's something that's valued in its own right, and then hopefully people thinking commodity in the typical sense. I know it's arguably synonymous with asset, but just, do you know what I mean? And in my background, at times in London Underground, I would just, the information I wanted, which would have been some kind of CAD drawing or something, was at best an afterthought. It's not the case now, because the place.
Well, just sort of following on from a slightly different thing, but picking up on what you're saying about commodity, there's something just going through my mind, interesting your thoughts on this. As businesses move more into this way of working, this world of the digital space, and their operations and maintenance become increasingly reliant on these systems, is there an associated vulnerability then in terms of around the security of those things? I'm just thinking, we see in the news in the last year, 2 years, 3, big names have had various cyber attacks, and whether it's state-backed or what have you, but the ability to suddenly be impacted on that. I was just interested in your thoughts in terms of the risk around that, and have people done any particular things in terms,
So there's this standard that came out in its first form in 2015 to address that.
Right.
Simple as that. So CPNI are the main or co-author, at least. That's the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure, which is part of MI5. So the early days of BIM, more than a decade, it obviously, and it is to some degree, let's share, let's collaborate, and maybe people went a bit too far, right? And no use cases for obvious reasons, but nearly everything I work in is critical national infrastructure by the definition, right? It's like the tube, right? So based on that, this guide came out. It's more targeted, obviously, for the owners. Forgive me, I don't think you can read that there, but I've said what it is. It's part of the international standard ISO 19650 Part 5. So it's evolved from that to an international. And one of the core things in it is a triage process that the asset owner has to go through. So how sensitive are the assets? I mean, there's a whole standard, right? So I'm only paraphrasing. That has to be done, and it should address what you're talking about. Because then how you share the information, who can see it, who can have access to it, maybe we need to redact parts of it. So one scenario I give would be, for example, the fact that there might be a window, let's say, in a certain operational control centre somewhere in a given city. It's not a secret that there's a window there, because you can see it, right? But what might be classified is the specification of the glass.
Yeah.
Because it's blast proof and bulletproof.
And what's inside that room?
Yeah, and what's in it, yeah, exactly.
Inside that chamber.
Yeah, and there's like, or even server rooms. Even server rooms, if not, so anyway, again, it won't address these. But people who need to know probably already know, you hope. So this is for other people. So water infrastructure, fresh drinking water is obviously sensitive as well. Not just things like the tube, electrical distribution, power stations. But again, it doesn't say what you do about it. But one observation. My original career was in mapping, like I've already said. But it used to be quite obvious where defence estate had been redacted in the past because there was blanks. So that's not the case now. They're more sophisticated in covering up, you know, and I can't do a search and find big blanks in the United Kingdom anymore. So my observation, this isn't discussed in here, but my observation would be very mature clients then have a method of not having cupboards with nothing in them. This is going way beyond the conversation for today, but if I want to find the server room, I'm just going to look for rooms with allegedly nothing in it, for example. This is hypothetical for the way people are watching, because I'm sure it's not like that. You could trace the cables, for example, but at least I will give that a scenario which is probably not real, just to get people to think. It has to be scenario based, and that's way out of my sort of pay grade to discuss that stuff. I just genuinely wouldn't know. But if I did, I wouldn't be able to tell you anyway. Never. But anyway, that's the one to go to.
It is really interesting.
Yeah.
The brain has to go.
But there's yeah, that is mature enough, that conversation in 2015. So, okay. But I can't give you any. The few examples I know, I can't give you.
No.
But any questions? I've probably utilised all my time, have I? But
I think you've answered the question that was asked online about how we move between projects and asset management quite well. There's no question around.
Just one other point for me, Mike, it's the amount of data that's captured by. So we're all into sort of there's this thing called plain line pattern recognition. That's the yellow trains that run around.
Yeah, the new measurement
data.
train. Yeah.
And the thank you. So
flying banana.
New measurement
In other
train.
words. Yeah.
And people looking at capturing data. I've got this thing about, and I'm in favour of it actually in terms of capturing the data using these computer tools to spot differences.
Yeah.
But you've got to get the balance between boots on ballast to go out and look at them. But it's that managing that data. What have you got an opinion about how do we live with all that data and manage it efficiently and competence of the individuals? You can't just get can't just perhaps we used to give it to a graduate to go through that stack of data.
So it's a good point, because you can make arguments either way. One is that the cost of cloud storage of information now, because of, I guess, Moore's law or whatever, is getting less and less and less. So you could have an infinite amount of data, every laser scan, you didn't necessarily, and then because of machine learning will use it. But I'm not sold on that one, because for now I would rather put my initial effort on structured data. So in your example, it's more than, because of course they have they have video recognition already. So I know you maybe gave that as a hypothetical example, but they have missing clip recognition, and they have done for at least a decade or probably 20 years. So again, this is for the benefit of people watching. So that already actually exists. So that'll be a ping, and they'll try to recalibrate it with the.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Small debate. That's
But that's good.
But you can pick it up. But then it's that trend analysis. So where someone might say, "Why are we constantly getting clips on that location? Why am I constantly getting that wear pattern there?
Yeah.
Why am I constantly getting a wet bed here or something?" Whereas they might just the crude computer might just say problem. Someone analysing it might say fix. But I just sort of can.
So this is
intelligently manage it and say we've got a root problem there. We need to go in and have a good look at the root cause.
So I can't really show you the slide because it's not from this section line. It would be inappropriate, but just that language fulfills business intelligence type of thinking. Cool. Yeah, sorry, I was flying from a different sector, but just that's why I've added these, right? So So BIM is not by definition about business intelligence, right? It's about getting the data, like I've said 100 times, systematically, and then we can do more things with it. Now, what we could do is create dashboards. This is partly what I do, right? But I want to do, and the thing I can't show you is exactly what we did at the underground about clusters of defects. But I can't show that because it's been recorded. But that's exactly why people were suddenly very interested in the GIS. And it literally was heat maps. If we had defects, it would grow and grow. You know, people.
Then you get your specialists. You need to go and look at it, to go out and target it, and you use your experts.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the sort of thing that RMT needs to understand, that they're not going to lose their jobs. We're going to use them better to go and look at and fix stuff.
It's just I didn't use it because I didn't want to be completely consultancy, but I mean the term still works. Decision support tool, right? It was just like, I know people used to say that, but I think actually it's come around again 10 years later, because I think these dashboards, again, these are not from the rail sector, but you think if most of what I've been talking about is getting this bit right, but to just be clear, that's what I've been talking about today. Let's get it right so I can sleep at night, that there are processes, and however I unbundle it, I know I'm going to get the information I need, or someone will. The conversation then, hopefully in the near future, will shift to then or it should already, what we do. In fact, you need to know that now before you can work backwards. You know what I mean? So this, actually, I'll correct myself there, this we need to be doing now to then work out what that asset requirement. But the output probably looks like this. For a lot of people, it probably doesn't look like a 3D model. It might be generated from a three-dimensional model.
I think that's the sort of thing.
But, and of course, we use linear and schematic representations, which isn't unique because utilities would do. Anyway, so I've gone over the time.
And that's easier for the overview individual to look at instead of all into lots of data. Great, thanks very much. That's really good.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the questions. I'll stop talking now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much for this introduction.
You're very welcome.
To this week, it's sort of a scary word, BIM, when it's suddenly mentioned. Everyone goes, put that over in the corner somewhere.
Yeah.
So, key thing I think is like sharing data. Brilliant idea. Trying to get your hands on information is still a difficult thing.
Definitely.
Still, I spend my time going to rail project managers say, can you put in a request for the records, please? Just to get them. But definitely, the idea of BIM for decision making, that they're just deciding, it's all about allowing engineers to make an informed decision, hopefully. So that when we're actually saying, this is what we should do, we've actually got the background and the information saying, this is what we should do, and this is why we've made that decision. I think one last interesting sort of relevance and link back to us, and you might have come across this, is it's very strange from my experience when I was sort of working within the underground environment. I could often find a better record from a bridge that was built 100 years ago than the one that was built 10 years ago. And it's purely just because of what the information at the time and whatever it just made its way through the many systems to the point where I could actually find the records. Into the point I remember one bridge, we found the bridge records but in the wrong place quite often. And at this point I remember once there was the talk of the bridge of ringing around former engineers who had retired many years ago to see if anybody had actually kept a copy of the calculations.
And that still happens,
Anyway, so thank you very much for
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Invite everyone to so
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll make sure this. I know there's a lot in the slides, so I'll make sure they're shared.
will be recorded and put on somewhere.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Great, thank you very much.